But before you have to look for anything, I will tell you, yes, I'm Nikki Hayes. Oh, good.
Yeah, testifiers, make sure you say your name first.
Don't start my time yet?
Yeah.
I spent 2.5 hours on I-35 this morning and got 10 miles for the accident. So you gotta have my hand out. I will cry if I don't get this handout to you. Okay, don't be fiddling with it right now. Just get it, and I'll tell you what to do with it. Mr. Mercer's over there. I want to open it. I want to open it. I retired. I worked 19 years in Central Texas as a high school teacher and a middle school teacher and a counselor. And then I went off for 9 years in Washington State and was a principal for a K-12 school on an Indian reservation and a K-5 school in Seattle. Retired in Seattle, came back to Texas where they love God and country down here, and really wanted to be back in Texas where I understood what was going on. And I tutor now, having retired 10 years. I tutor math. And one of the things I want to tell you is that there are a lot of legacies about the process standards, and I want to show you one of them right now that concerns me. This is a book, a first grade book that is common here in Texas. It is totally aligned with the Common Core, which is, that's okay, I'm told, and it's fine, but here's my concern. First grade, and it's 2 volumes, 741 pages in 180 days of teaching. Tell me how that is supposed to happen, folks, for a first grade teacher to teach 1 hour a day, which would be 4.5 pages a day for first graders to get finished in order to complete the first year of math. The teacher has told me there's no way she can finish this, obviously, and so the kids are going to the second grade incomplete on their first grade knowledge and skills. The second grade teacher has to try to catch up on all that and do the second grade as well. So about every other page on this, it says draw a picture, write a story, explain something. Now, if you say, okay, the teacher doesn't have to get through the whole set, then why buy a whole set? That doesn't make sense to me, that we're spending that kind of money on 741 pages. Now you can look in your little handout to page C, as in cat, and you will see the number of pages in each of the second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, and sixth grade books. 700 pages in first grade, 700 in second grade, almost 700 in third grade. Then we get into the 600s in fourth and fifth grade. And finally in the sixth grade, they get down to 560 something pages. So my concern with process standards is how we use them. Now the other thing, this is going to look like a religious statement, and it's not meant to be religious at all, but I'm going to show you a page of what's considered very well-written standards on one page. It's called the 10 Commandments. It tells us what to do, it tells us what not to do, but it doesn't tell us how to do it. And so it seems to me that if this could last for 3,000 years, if this can last for 3,000 years, I would love to have content standards, because in my way of thinking, it gives freedom to teachers to use any method they can. I told my staff as a principal, I don't care if you dance on your tabletop. Get them to know the multiplication table. Get them to know their basic math. I don't care how you do it. And I did a lot of projects myself. But the bottom line is, you don't have to have a lot of words written on paper that confine people as to what they should be doing. Give them the freedom with the content standards that then they can do what they need to with process. I heard the bell this time.
Well, Nikki, I'd like you to continue, but one thing I want you to touch on, please, is the critical thinking part of this whole thing that people's been asking.
Yeah, a lot of people think that the process skills are used primarily to help develop critical thinking in the children. Well, I had heard one parent say something one time recently, and I thought, wow, that's new to me. So I did some research and found out that critical thinking happens in the anyway, in the front part of your brain,
Yeah,
the frontal lobes of your brain. And that is the last part of the brain that develops. And it doesn't start developing until you're 11 or 12 years old in middle school. So critical thinking ability is not able to be done with kids in K-5. It's not able until you hit middle school. And then we finally, about 25, we're able to think critically. You can teach the critical thinking skills, like how do you evaluate? How do you interpret? How do you analyze? Those are skills that can be taught, but to think that 741 pages of very difficult words is making you write, draw, whatever, is going to make you a critical thinker in K-5, it's not going to work. And you can look it up. I looked it up because that was news to me. So critical thinking is important, and mathematics, if you know your mathematics, you're going to be a critical thinker.
One other question real quick. The big debate, is do we leave everything the way it is, or do we try to edit or do something about the process standards, because they seem to have been given too much emphasis, if you will, rather than a balance that apparently has been in place. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, if you go to page B in my handout, I lined up the Common Core process standards with our standards, process standards. They're color coded, so you can see, yes, they are almost word for word with Common Core standards. It's, and you have to, follow the colors and you can see. But the very opening then on page A of my handout, our standards say, the process standards describe ways to engage in content. That tells how. The placement of the process skill at the beginning of the draft is intentional. The process skills weave other knowledge and skills together. So the engine that's driving our teams are the process skills. And that's how they ended up being so important and having so much weight. It says right there, they're the ones that weave all the knowledge and skills together. And I would also say this one last thing, not one last thing, but from the 5th grade to the 10th grade, I went to 15 schools. My dad was in construction work, and I went to 15 schools. And the one thing I always had to look forward to was all the books were the same. This is my 6th grade Texas math book. And I could have all new kids and all new teachers and all new ways, but I saw my math book, and it was the same. And do you know that 80% of this book, I didn't know this until now, 80% of this book is word problems on everyday things that touch your life, and only 20% was on computational practice. So the idea that all of our stuff was drill and kill and rote memorization is bunk. It is bunk. How did we get all those mathematicians and scientists and engineers to help win a world war? This was printed in 1946. I was in the 6th grade in 1952. So that's a long time ago. The whole book was on on fractions. 7th grade was on decimals. 8th grade was on percent. And we knew those things before we had algebra. So I'm not saying the old is necessarily good, but it wasn't bad. What we learned back then was not bad. I just would like to see my kids that I tutor be able to tell me what 3 times 4 is without saying 3, 6, 9, 12, and counting on their fingers. And they're in the 6th grade. Something's wrong. So you cannot spend all the time on process and have the time you need on procedures. And I would also encourage a lot of people to survey high school teachers and see what you think. Ask the high school teachers what they're seeing that's coming to them. I love the fact that kids are having a good time in math at the elementary level. I like having a good time in math at the elementary level. But when they walk in, there are 4 ways to measure math in this state. 1 is by test scores. 2 is by how many are taking advanced science and math classes. 3 is how many are not taking dumbed down, watered down math programs just to graduate. And the other thing is how many are not being tutored outside. Right now, we have an $8 billion business in this country on tutoring, and it's mostly in math. So we gotta face reality here. What we like and what we need are two different things.
Do you think we just should wait till the next update?
I think legally we have to wait until the next update, but I don't think we have to keep the process standards. Because when you take them out, what you leave is content that people can then figure out what their kids need.
Well, and I remember Dr. Milgram said today that when you do take it, then the content, you gotta work on the content. 'Cause
Yeah,
it's-
but you know, good teachers in any school, you can say, gee, I don't think this is gonna hack it for the second grade. We better add some stuff to this.
Oh.
They'll find a way to fix it. Teachers will find a way to fix it. And to keep saying they just need more time, kids don't have time to give them. They have 1 year per grade to learn their material. They don't have time for us to figure out how to do it.
So
Okay.
much.
Thank you, ma'am. I was listening to your testimony, and so I wanted to point out two things that I see in some comments that were made with this the survey that we were handed earlier. And so there are two particular comments that caught my attention that sort of align with what you're saying, but you all are on two opposite sides of this conversation. So I'm trying to understand your thought process. So the first is the process standards are an integral part of how students should engage in learning mathematics. When we move the engagement, we are left with empty computation and meaningless math. It almost sounds like you said that as well, but
I'm sorry, I'm having a really hard time hearing you.
okay. I'll read it again, because I think it's important. It says, the process standards are an integral part of how students should engage in learning mathematics. When we remove the engagement, we are left with empty computation and meaningless math. The second is, if you take away the process standards, you take away the student's ability to apply mathematics, and you make them a repeating machine.
Are you reading something out of my papers?
No, ma'am.
Oh,
I'm reading some, but it sounds like what you were saying earlier, which I think I sort of drew those connections. But you're on the opposite side of what it seems this survey would support, which is leaving the process standards as is, letting our teachers letting our teachers work through these standards.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to point out those two likenesses in what you're saying, because I'm trying to understand what you're thinking. And then I wanted you to elaborate on a comment you made. It says, if you know your math, you'll be a critical thinker. Can you explain what you mean by that? Because for me, the way that I'm understanding the process standards as they are, you're offering a lot of opportunities for students who are very different types of learners. We heard earlier from Ms. Fromberger and from Ms. McElroy that they're teachers, and they, as practitioners, have to deal with many different little minds that they're trying to teach, a concept to. So the process standards offer different ways of teaching students so we can all get to one goal. And so I think that is a part of that process of becoming a critical thinker. Can you explain to me what you meant by understanding your math, you'll be a critical thinker, if that's not what
you want me to? I'm so sorry. I do have a hearing problem now, I'm told. You want me to explain that last part?
I'd like you to explain or maybe elaborate on your comment. If you know your math, you'll be a critical thinker.
Yes. If you learn your math, and this is one of the things that's said by David Klein and Stephen Wilson and wonderful mathematicians who say, if you've learned your mathematics, the procedures, the patterns, all of the linear development so that you know your mathematics well, then you will be a critical thinker because you will have learned. Let me back up just a minute. Process and procedure are synonyms in the dictionary. What Dr. Milgram was talking about this morning, what we see as a process is when you're learning the process of finding the answer with a quadratic equation or with the Pythagorean theorem or with any of the multiplication problems, multiplying and dividing with decimals. Those are killers for kids lots of times, and fractions are killers. Once you learn those processes, which we call the procedures, and years ago we called process, when you learn that, you will then be able to analyze a problem, take it apart, recognize the parts, put it back together. You will be able to evaluate your answer as being reasonable or not. And so when you learn to think with the bits and pieces of a discipline so that that all fits together and you get the right answer, that's critical thinking.
So do the varying processes that are currently in place not support that?
I'm sorry?
Do the varying processes that are currently in place not support that? Because you have different learners in one classroom. And
Okay.
so if you offer different strategies for students who interpret math differently, is that not?
Have you go, I'm gonna give you an example, okay? Go in your handout to page 2 of D section. Find the D, and then go to page 2. This is a test that was on the 5th grade STAR that I was trying to tutor a little girl who has dyslexia. And there are so many words on the STAR test that it's a reading test as much as it's a math test. And if you look under where it says STAR, 5th grade, practice question, here was what she had to figure out. The side length of a square is 20 millimeters. Which statement about this square is true? The perimeter of the square is 400 millimeters because 20 times 20 equals 400. Or the perimeter of the square is 80 millimeters because 20 times 4 equals 80. Or the area of the square is 40 square millimeters because 20 times 2 equals 40. Or the area of the square is 80 square millimeters because 20 times 4 is 80. Now obviously to find the area of anything of a square, you have to know side square or base times height or length times width. So if you have that basic knowledge in your head, you can figure this out as long as you can read all those problems. That is called a process question. Because do you know the process for finding your answer? To me, if you can find the square or the width or the length, they wanted the length of the square and then they wanted the area of the square. So that's a process question. It's not a bad question. I just think it's a tough question for a 5th grader who has a reading difficulty. And I'll tell you this, the recent SAT is under a lot of fire right now because of their low scoring, because their wordy problems were killing kids who don't speak English very well.
Thank you.
I got
Done?
Oh, you ended up on a big one because guess which national exam last year finally converted to Common Core? The College Board announced that last year was the first time that David Coleman, who I've met, a really nice man, I don't agree with him on this, but he was the head of Common Core. He became head of the College Board, and the first thing he did was change the College Board, the SAT,
Yes.
which under the College Board, to align with Common Core. And now you just announced that the word, again, what you just said, what happened with Common Core scores on the wordy math problems, or?
On the SAT, they had worse scores because, and a lot of mathematicians were stepping into the picture saying the questions on the Common Core, or the SAT, were text heavy. And the students were saying, I couldn't finish the test because I couldn't get through all the reading. And so it wasn't so much about math, it was about the fact that the word problems were so gruesome for them to try to get through.
That's unrelated, but now I understand why kids are telling me about their classes on how to game the SAT.
Yeah, well,
A wordy test you may skip the. I want to make sure I understand process, procedure versus content. Dr. Milgram talked about how we need to move back to more content, but process versus procedure versus content. Can you help me separate those three?
Well, in our way of thinking, process and procedure were the same thing. If my kid can do the process of multiplication, he's also doing the procedure. Processes became more expanded starting in 1989 with NCTM by their saying we want them to be able to understand the full process and be able to evaluate and understand the concept. So when we say process, it means doing the procedure. When they say process, it means being able to explain how you did it and maybe explain it 3 different ways.
I see. And again, legally, I'm on a different slant than everybody else. I keep thinking about our thing about not just Common Core, but we cannot tell the classroom educators should decide how to do things. We tell what. And so with the words that you had, Dr. Milgram, and others too, is a process. Are we in danger of telling that classroom educator how to do things?
Absolutely. When it says you will do this and it names 4 or 5 things, the teacher has to do all of those things because it's in the law. You will do this.
Thank you.
Yes, sir?
Oh, I just have, just in conclusion, I just wondering if, did you hear the testimony this morning?
Yes.
Yeah, and you've heard the testimony since we've come back from lunch?
Yes, sir.
And so it seems like that we kind of have, two different philosophies.
Sure.
Sort of in play here. Kind of what are your reflections on, kind of what was said this morning versus what is said this afternoon? What are your reflections on that?
It's also in my notes on the section E. Values are what determine what we use and teach. You can put all the standards in the world out there, and if someone has no value for it, they're not going to do it. So my value is I want content. I'm a math teacher. I want content, and let me determine what processes appear that I want to use for my Indian kids, my Hispanic kids, my black kids, my white kids. My kids in Seattle were upper middle class, white, and I found out they couldn't do math either, and you know why? They had a bad math book. They weren't required to learn their basic skills. And then within 3 years of getting a good math book, they had gone from 66% passing to 90% passing, just by using a good math book.
All right, very good, thank you.
Okay, now it's on. Thank you for coming again. It was interesting when you were reflecting what students are saying about not being able to make it through the SAT because of the number of and length of the word problems, and you might have heard me say that earlier, that's what I've been hearing from parents, that their kids are having trouble because of the number of word problems versus the naked math. Do you think that's something we need to consider? Like I asked Jacqueline, wanted to give you the opportunity to answer that too.
Well, I feel very strongly the cleaner the language, the clearer the language, the better off we are. So, and did you say on the STAR? Is that what you're
On the stars? What,
Absolutely.
yeah.
The process questions need to come out of the STAR test. I'm sure they can find something on content they could put in place.
I didn't know if any of the kids you tutor, if their parents had talked to you about the number of word problems and the length of the word problems on the STAR test.
I'm just very concerned. My whole life has been spent working with learning disabled kids. A lot of times it was just because they were gang kids and they refused to learn. But the bottom line was, I had a wonderful teacher, professional development trainer, who said one time, act, don't yak. She said, just do it and quit talking. And I think that's one of the things we need to look at.